Hello and welcome to ESG for Small and Mid-Sized Business, part of the 4th annual Rising Economy Conference hosted by the South Island Prosperity Partnership. My name is John McDonald, publisher of the Business Examiner News Group, a digital business news provider and event producer covering Vancouver Island, the Fraser Valley, Thompson, Okanagan, and Northern BC. We are supporting this event because of the tremendous impact and growth of the South Island Prosperity Partnership that's been shown over the past few years. We want to be where our region's decision makers are, and we believe that this is where this is here at the 2024 Rising Economy Summit. In a moment, I will turn over things to our speaker first, but a quick overview for the format. About halfway through the conversation, we'll be getting your questions for the speakers. You can submit a question at any time through the Zoom Q&A below this video. This session is being recorded, and you can submit your question anonymously if you prefer. To interact with attendees, you can use the Zoom or Whova chat. The production team will monitor the Whova chat and Q&A for those joining us through the app. Finally, if you're posting your takeaways to social media, please use the hashtag Rising Economy Week 2024. And now for our moderator introduction. Our moderator today is Andy Harris, a seasoned business professional whose fondness for the outdoors greatly influences his professional pursuits. As a longtime practitioner in sustainable development, clean technology, and circular business, Andy has directed teams around the world in complex development projects and led innovative, sustainable real estate developments on 4 continents. He's scaled business in new markets as VP of Waste to Energy Canada and grew sustainable technology of a venture capital firm. More recently, Andy's senior leadership at Radicle helped the business to flourish prior to acquisition by BMO. Andy guided senior finance teams at BMO Radicle into action, leading emissions measurement capabilities and carbon credit development opportunities. Currently, Andy is on sabbatical to shape what's next. Welcome, Andy.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. We've got a very exciting session today. So what we're looking at is how business decision makers are increasingly expected to be more socially and environmentally responsible. And ESG as a label can be viewed as a platform for guiding thinking and then action. And convincing people to act is no easy task. However, this is a great time to be what we like to call positively unsettled, and for businesses to rise up, to follow this conference theme, towards these opportunities. And a colleague of mine would say that the time for pessimism is long gone. So we'll be viewing business responsibility through the conference lens of resilience, innovation, sustainability, and equitability. We don't have a whole lot of time because this is a large and chunky topic. So our ACE panel will explore various practical ways that SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, can do the right thing. So without further ado, let me have each of our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get into things. So Basma Majerbi, finance professor at University of Victoria. Do you want to introduce yourself, please, Basma?
Yes, thank you, Andy, and thanking SIP also for organizing this important panel discussion. So I'm Basma Majerbi. I'm a finance professor at Gustavson School of Business. And in addition to teaching and research, I'm also leading the Impact Investing Hub, which is a research and education hub whose mission is to align finance with the transition to a low-carbon, inclusive, and resilient economy. We have a range of activities that center around 3 focus areas: climate and nature finance, transition finance, which is related to today's topic in the sense that we're aiming to support SMEs and small communities to attract ESG and impact-driven capital. And then the third focus area has to do with inclusive finance, with trying to create awareness and also address inequalities in access to finance for women, racial minorities, and Indigenous entrepreneurs. And this is a nice occasion to wish all the women International Women's Day. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of discrimination in capital markets where women do not get the same, amazing women entrepreneurs do not get the same access to capital. So I'll just leave it there and look forward to the rest of the discussion.
That's wonderful, Basma. Thank you once again, and that reminder too. That's gratefully received. On to Emma Carswell, Director of ESG Policy and Programs at the Government of BC.
Hi, thanks, Andy, and thanks to SIP for organizing. I've really enjoyed the last couple of days in person. I am based in Victoria and grown up on Vancouver Island, so kind of feel that pride of it's a pretty special place both here and I think just BC in general. So I'm Director of Policy and Programs with the very newly launched ESG Center of Excellence, which is within the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation, or JEDI. And we just launched on February 8th with, we'll be kind of building up over time, but our offerings are around tools, resources, and expert guidance and connections for BC businesses who are looking to either start or continue on their ESG journey and figuring out the landscape and what makes sense to them and how they can really use ESG as a competitive advantage hoping to kind of build and grow from there. So we're very happy to see the topic of this panel and be a part of it. So I'll share more about the center later. Thank you.
Great. Thanks again, Emma. And then on to Heather Tanaka, who's the investment principal at InBC, the Investment Corporation.
Thank you, Andy. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Tanaka, investment principal at InBC. So we are a Crown corporation. We have $500 million to invest in BC-based companies and funds, and we really do have a triple bottom line mandate, so investing in people, planet, and the profit. For us, we really look to have that strong connection to BC, and we have 4 different impact areas that we look after. So all of the investments that we make, whether they're in companies or venture capital funds, fall into one of our impact areas. And those are driving climate action, which is obviously a very, very important one, and one of our bigger buckets of areas that we see a deal flow in. Innovating for the future is also a big bucket. So that includes anything ranging from life sciences and biotech to things like AI, which we're hearing a lot about these days, and other things like robotics and automation. Advancing reconciliation is our 3rd impact objective, so supporting Indigenous entrepreneurship and the ecosystem more broadly. And then elevating inclusive communities is our 4th impact objective, and that includes things like the care economy, health tech, and affordable housing, amongst many others. So we support both companies and venture capital funds. Typically for companies, it's at the Series A stage and beyond. And then for venture capital funds, really looking at anything from pre-seed up to later stage funds as well. So, we really do try to walk the talk when it comes to ESG and DEI, and really put impact first and foremost alongside our financial returns.
That's great, Heather. And with this broader lens as well, that's so much needed. I'm also interested to hear thoughts from Paul Lacerte, the Managing Director at Raven Indigenous Capital, who haven't yet met, but we've heard so many good things about. So getting that perspective to really round out this discussion is going to be great. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks so much for the invitation to participate. I'm going to just do a brief introduction in my own carrier language, which I can speak relatively well, but I'm still in training. So it's up around Prince George territory. So Hadia Deneza Tsekeza Daicho Paul Sadni Khan Gilam Gilo Sadni Zagana Laxiliu in Janyin Kaktane Keoch Tabesta Chadlia in Jan Lakwangan Keoch Tabe Udzin and Dada Andinzin in Jan Huloch. I wanted to just thank each of you for being here today and let you know that my English name is Paul Lacerte. My traditional name is Gilam Gilo. I come from the Carrier territory, and I'm a member of the Caribou clan. We're a matrilineal society, so I want to honor and acknowledge my mother and my matrilineal line. I'm joining you today from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, which is the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, which is adjacent to Victoria. I'm the co-founder of the Moosehide campaign together with my daughter Raven, and we have now distributed 6 million squares of moosehide across Canada. Each square starts about 5 conversations. So we've started 30 million conversations about ending violence against women. And I want to center that today just in honor and respect of International Women's Day and the urgency of us addressing and smashing patriarchy, and particularly for us as men to be participants and drivers and supporters of a rematriation process in everything that we do at work and at home. My day job is I'm the founding partner and chief impact officer for Raven Indigenous Capital Partners, which is North America's first Indigenous owned financial intermediary. And I'm super stoked to be on this panel because both the University of Victoria and InBC are both investors, but also incredible partners in giving expression to what economic reconciliation actually looks like when it's more than money. So I really wanted to, again, thank you all for being able to be here. Looking forward to a good discussion.
Thank you, Paul. And I think this speaks to, as you so nicely put it, Paul, this speaks to the nature of collaboration, or the natural collaboration that is required as we look to what is labeled ESG. And there's a very strong argument that we should relabel that to something else or add inclusivity to it. So it's ESGI. That maybe is another topic, but my own feelings is that ESG itself is somewhat limited. But however, we're looking at SMEs and a lot of them don't really know where to begin. So we're hopefully across the panel, our goal is to try and consider business performance, the teams, the people involved, finance, of course, given the group that we have here. Look at elements that apply to supply chains, whether it's the business's own or that business supplying others. And I also strongly feel that if we have time amongst all the questions which we anticipate, there is chance to delve into the sort of value creation, the storytelling that is required to lead people forward. From my own experience, I see this as an opportunity with massive challenges, like any good opportunity, not without flaws, not without great gems in there. Again, just like any other business opportunity. But I do sense that we need to have and help our business leaders evolve towards more multi-generational thinking and away from the traditional linear old school take, make and waste models. And how do we curve businesses into more rounded natural shapes and forms so they can endure? So let's start with business performance, and across the board, please feel free to jump in, our panelists. This is for all of you. Where should an SME leader start as they begin to navigate towards a less impactful future for their business?
Happy to, I guess we all jumped in. I can quickly kick it off. I sort of have 3 things. I think like governance and having support within the organization, whether you are the leader or you're looking to, engage your leader in this work, for there kind of to be value for business, it really needs to be something that is driven throughout the business and from the top, to be really done authentically and to see the most benefit from that. I think understanding number 2, that like the why, like what is the driver for you as a business? Are you being asked for certain information? Are you being proactive? And then really kind of centering your approach around that so you can again see kind of the most value for you. And don't worry about knowing it all at once and getting lost in the alphabet soup of acronyms. Like just one step at a time. Let's focus on what works for you and your business. So I'll pass it on.
Thanks, Emma.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that's like very similar to what I was going to say, Emma. I think there's like in impact investing in general. I think there are there's typically these 4 kind of core tenets or practices that really define impact investing. And out of these, I think there are a couple that are directly related to SMEs. So I think number one is just intentionality. Like Emma, to your point, you really don't have to be perfect in your impact practices. Like, I think it's much less about having policies in place and more about actually what's your intentionality and kind of walking the talk. Because as I can say, like as an impact investor, it's, you know, it's one thing to say that you've got like an ESG or a DEI policy in place, but what we really look for is like, are you embedding that into your practices? So things like, are you embedding DEI into your hiring process or your supply chain management, things like that. So number one, intentionality. Number two is like managing your impact performance. So I think, and I'm sure we'll probably get into this more in our discussion about measurement, but just like, if you manage your impact performance, it really does kind of open you up to this whole other world of people who care about this. So keep that in mind, like as you're starting to measure things and keeping it simple, which we'll get into. But you know, you're kind of opening yourselves up to impact investors, which are, you know, as an SME, if you're looking to scale and eventually get acquired or IPO, you know, those people are important to you in terms of like getting that financing and investment into your company.
Thanks, Heather.
I can add to that. I just want to emphasize the importance of the why. It's really critical in actually even getting started on ESG, particularly in the context of SMEs. And we've done some surveys last year and interviews with companies where it's really clear that most people think we kind of know it's important, but we're not really sure why we need to do it. And maybe I'll just offer quite you know, related to business performance, because we're going to touch on the other aspects later on. It's really critical to understand, you know, the why, and there are multiple dimensions of the why, some of them related to business performance, such as, for example, operational efficiency and cost savings. You know, when we take initiatives that are aimed to reducing waste and enhancing energy efficiency or using sustainable materials, they often lead to significant cost savings to small businesses, which can be reinvested in the business, right? So particularly when we are lacking resources. And of course, on the other side is in terms of like revenue generation. It's clear now with multiple years of research, and we see it in practice, that ESG, you know, implementing ESG practices leads to enhanced reputation and loyalty, brand loyalty. We see it, you know, demanded. You see information around ESG being requested from companies, from investors, customers, governments, and all sorts of stakeholders. And so definitely this has a huge impact for SMEs in a crowded market to kind of like distinguish themselves and show that they are socially responsible and conscious businesses. But the other aspect that, and we'll talk about supply chain implication later on, but one aspect I just want to bring into the discussion is the tsunami of regulations that have been enacted around the world in terms of making ESG mandatory. And just this week, for example, in the US, the Security Exchange Commission finally adopted their climate rule, basically requiring from listed companies mandatory disclosure of climate-related information, which will have a huge impact given the importance of the US market. But then last year, we know that the ISSP brought the new regulation, not regulation, but disclosure rules. And then in Europe, it's into law right now. It's impacting not only European companies, but also companies from around the world that are interacting with Europe. So this is basically, you know, and even if we think right now that this is only for listed companies, large companies, it is going to have tremendous ripple effect on SMEs. And some of the, you know, some countries are actually preparing their SME economy, considering how important this is, to become future-proof and then be ready for what is certainly upcoming regulations that will also affect SMEs. So I'll give an example. For example, Singapore was among the first countries in Asia that is making mandatory ESG reporting, and it's actually ramping up its investments in capacity building, particularly in the SME space. China also kind of like last month released its ESG rule. And so it's kind of like, in a global interconnected world, no matter what the size of the companies, this is going to have tremendous impact on the way we conduct business. And I think it's really important that we prepare our SMEs for this change.
Andy, I think we have consensus amongst the panel on this point, which is great. And I would frame it just as clarifying the value proposition, and I think articulating that and socializing that so that you deepen both buy-in and consensus for yourself as a leader and for your business. And I mean, my experience is that ESG and other frameworks are often associated to a reporting burden rather than an opportunity. And so, buy-in is really critical to achieve real results. I would say in public markets, as others have commented, it's often shareholder driven. It can often feel top down and is often not always associated to greenwashing. But I think for SMEs, particularly in this current fiscal climate, I think a lot of folks are just trying to get by. So I really want to acknowledge that there is this tension between the additionality of burdens and the really limited environment that we're in the context of time, people, and money for SMEs. And so it's really on us to be clear and concise, I think, internally about the value proposition. And for some, I would just add recruitment and retention is a big variable. If there's integrity around your sort of theory of change and your measurement process, it can be really advantageous in a recruitment and retention context. And I think the other thing I would add is mitigating climate anxiety. We're going to have the hottest and driest summer on record in this province, maybe ever. And so I think there's a lot of climate anxiety out there, and having a viable, clear, manageable approach to affecting change in this space, I think can be really helpful. And the last thing I'll say is that everybody's sort of, a lot of people think about this as being relatively new, the ESG movement as being relatively new. That may be true, but the concept of like respect for each other and respect for Mother Earth in the way that we run our businesses, and that way, even in the way that capital relates to each other and commerce, is super old. And so it's also really trusting and activating processes like rematriation and cultural processes, so that we're not trying to fit into a capitalist mindset, that we're actually bringing the richness from each of our cultures, all of our cultures, into this space to give expression to reanimating who we are really as community, and what resilient communities and resilient relationships with Mother Earth can look like.
Yeah, 100%. I'm nodding here as you've all described this. So thank you. What a great way to start a conversation from everybody. And I think, sort of to touch on this point in the sense that the old adage is what gets measured gets managed. As we understand what's happening, what does the panel think about? What are those key elements of measurement to move leaders towards this literacy so they can make better decisions? What are those sort of key elements of measurement, and why would they be important for a leader?
I'm happy to get started. I mean, I think I kind of laugh because yes, definitely whatever gets measured gets managed. And I think often when people start thinking about impact measurement, they just want to start measuring everything. And I could say, like, my one piece of advice would be to keep it simple, or so only measure what's actually truly meaningful to you, as like a business owner, and to your stakeholders, right? So for example, for us at InBC, impact measurement is a core, kind of metric that we measure for all, and we have many stakeholders. So like number one, the public, because we're a public fund. Number two is like the government. And then we measure things internally as well. So for us, things that really matter to us are kind of like those overarching things, like the number of quality jobs created in the province as a result of our investment, and intellectual property created and maintained in the province is another big one. But then within like each sector industry, you know, there are of course like so many impact metrics, and you know, for each company, like to your point, Paul, like there's a deficit of time, right? Especially for SMEs. So like we're very cognizant of what we're asking companies and funds to track, right? Because it's like, you know, it's like a trickle down effect, right? And it's an onerous thing to do. So I would just like, my one piece of advice is just like, don't measure too much and be very intentional about what you measure, and like make sure it's actually matters to you and your stakeholders. Because yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to like continuously measure. It's so much easier just to like keep it simple and then add onto it, rather than like starting at something complex. And it doesn't have to be like a super complex like software program that you use, you know, like an Excel spreadsheet is a great way to start.
Thanks, Heather.
I can hop in, Andy. This is a broad area, and as is this question, but I would sort of narrow in on an additionality opportunity here, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And it's a key element that I think is often missing in this conversation, specifically about what gets measured. And so the UN DRIP, I think, emerged in and around the same time as the SDGs. It is also a globally recognized framework, but often fund managers, the investment community, academia, and SMEs don't see the alignment or applicability to the UN DRIP as accountability associated to measurement. And I think there are some huge advantages and some really wonderful opportunities associated to engaging one or more of the 46 articles of the UN DRIP, and then designing a metric or an indicator that you measure, just one metric or indicator that you measure over a year, to show your participation in, I think, a really important movement here in Canada. And it really allows that intersectionality. I think it invigorates the spirit of reconciliation. I think it reduces barriers and increases a sense of meaning for SMEs that is distinct to the domestic context. It's legislated here in British Columbia and in Canada, yet I think many SMEs and fund managers and stakeholders still do not see themselves as being accountable, or the necessity to align their impact measurement process. And this is, you know, for all of us that are participating. So the ESG plus I that I have been wrestling with is actually ESG plus Indigenous, and obviously that is not well received inside the Indigenous community, because it completely misses the mark of a starting point to center of gravity of Indigenous sovereignty. And FPIC, you know, outside of the debate about whether or not it's a veto, you know, has been recognized now and entrenched in legislation. And so, you know, I think global standards in this context are important, but if you're looking at alignment and you're looking at things to measure, then I would consider looking at the DRIP. And we have a framework that we've developed that can help you. And it's the Raven Capital Indigenous Impact Measurement Framework. We call it the RIM. It's an open source document, so you can go to Raven Capital's website and download it, and you can modify the document and use it in for whatever purpose might help you. But it includes some reference material, not exhaustive, but some reference material to show how individual companies can align to one of the 46 articles of the DRIP and then start to give expression to it.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
And yeah, I think we're again in agreement here on a lot of the topics, and we heard from the capital provider perspective. I agree with Paul. on the limitation of existing ESG frameworks with respect to Indigenous reconciliation. And I think Canada has a tremendous opportunity to play a leadership role in this space, particularly in BC. But even in the general frameworks that are currently being developed, and we see a trend towards more harmonization and standardization, it's good news to help clarify the space. But let's face it, I mean, it's still, you know, when we talk about ESG, it's not just like 2 or 3 issues for which we need to you know, include measurement, right? It's like a whole range of topics. It's like overwhelming for a company to look at. And so it's really important to understand this concept of what is material for the company, for the business, for the industry, to get a starting point. And there's more and more agreement on this, you know, like climate, for example, is something that all, you know, both regulation or as well as other stakeholders, you know, investors and so on, are really paying big attention to. And so so this is an important important one, particularly here in BC with climate change. We know the impacts are ramping up, right? So it's very important for the resilience of the companies to pay attention to climate risk, but also look for opportunities, right? So when we measure, it's not just to measure because we're worried about, you know, compliance or anything, but it also gives us a baseline to think about where we see opportunities to enhance our business model, to move forward, right? And then measurement is super important. I think everyone mentioned here, but there is also, we have to recognize a big backlash around ESG, right? So, you know, because part of the reason is ideological, but there's also real concerns around greenwashing. And I think, you know, measuring and providing good quality data, whether to investors or customers or others, is super important to really, you know, for the credibility of the actions taken by the company, because otherwise we don't really know. It's just like, you know, glossy reports saying, oh, we're doing that, we're doing this, and nobody really see real metrics for the action. So it's really important to think about it in this space. So first of all, as a benchmark for yourself, to identify areas, you know, gaps and opportunities, but also to for the credibility of your company vis-a-vis your stakeholders.
Thanks, Basma. Emma, did you want to dive in on this one?
Sure.
Yeah. Over here, but please jump in.
I think, yeah, I mean, definitely would just emphasize everything that the other panel members have said, and I was thinking too, like, you know, separate from like the exact metrics, you know, thinking of the last couple of days, we've heard from a number of BC companies, and there was a specific kind of Indigenous economy panel, and they talked about a lot of things in terms of what Paul was alluding to, in terms of it's not a new concept of thinking of you know, our impact on the environment, earth, our community, thinking about our community's needs and values, and thinking of future generations. And so even just like kind of starting off with a bit of like, you know, we can all learn from that and try to come back to that a little bit of, you know, yeah, what are our values? I've heard, you know, social purpose as a term as well, of like, yeah, what is your business's social purpose and values? And then from there identifying, well, where are those like key metrics and areas of opportunity that that we can really build on and measure, and then help to tell our story, and just, yeah, try to kind of balancing that with if you're being asked for specific metrics that are kind of just imposed on you if you're wanting to go for a business opportunity. There's also the ability to be a bit proactive too.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what I'm hearing is, as part of this, as we weave a better way of doing business going forward, we're particularly enriched in BC with the talent and the mindset where others have done this already. So any SME leader out there doesn't necessarily feel like they're the first person doing this. There's a lot of resources. I've heard, you know, Paul's kindly offered up information. Emma, I know you're going to talk about the service you guys are going to be providing in a little bit here, but there's already a tremendous support here. So no one's out on their own. And as leaders, sometimes it's a lonely, been there, done that. You know, it can be a lonely existence if you're starting up. We are very fortunate that there's so many people out here are enriching others by sharing advice freely. And we're very fortunate there. So I'm grateful for that. And that leads me sort of to the next question, because with this evolution in mind and innovation being so important, and also I like this idea of the opposite of a good idea can also be a good idea. How do we create or help and support those leaders come up with newer ways or more creative ways to reduce their impact? We've talked a lot about some of the logical elements and the structural behavioral elements. What about the creativity side? Feel free to jump in again, panelists here. If we want to dive in, that would be great, just to hear your perspective there.
I'll just go with just a few thoughts here, Andy. I'm a big advocate of baselines and hard targets, and keeping it simple. I would say importantly in that process is to engage your family. Like in the creative context, I would suggest engage your family, and that means your family at home and your family at work. And as an investor, I talk about this particular issue with my children, and I'm a young grandpa. I have 2 little grandbabies, and when we have this conversation and they're about, it changes things. Actually, it changes things quite dramatically. And I want to bring their names in. Cedar Bear, she's 5, and Chasiaz is my youngest little granddaughter. She's 1.5 years old. The commitment, the passion, the mindset, I think changes really dramatically when we have these conversations as families, and the opportunity for reculturalization and people to shift more towards from a burden to feeling like this is actually an opportunity to self-actualize. It can really translate into buy-in, impact, and sustainability. And at the end of the day, this is really a humanity issue, and we all have responsibility to the next 7 generations. And the way that has shifted our language at Raven Capital is that we've changed our lexicon, and it would be my encouragement to each of you. So when we're having this conversation, we now say that the words or information that we're sharing is actually a form of medicine. So we don't talk about exchanging data, we talk about exchanging medicine. And that the work that we're doing together is actually sacred. The conversation that we're having today, I consider it to be sacred because we're connecting our minds and our hearts together for the purposes of doing a better job of lifting up people and lifting up our planet. So there's like some sacredness to that. And if the work that we're doing is sacred, then we're actually in a ceremony. So when I enter these conversations, I genuinely feel like I'm entering into a ceremony more than I feel like I'm entering into a conference. And that's a really powerful shift. It is actualizing our opportunity in the reconciliation, decolonization, and reculturalization space, because when we change our lexicon, we change the container. And when you do that in engagement with whoever your stakeholder is, family or business, I think it's more powerful, and it enables you to meet people where they're at, and it allows for the kind of rapid transformation that we actually need right now. I think it's one of the secret sauces in the space.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah. Anybody else jump in? I'm not rushing anybody because we want everyone's context, but I'm also aware we've got a few more things to get into.
This is beautiful, Paul. I just want to, this is very powerful, of course. And as you said, not just in the family, but also in the team. After all, businesses are people, right? And what I would like to add, you mentioned the buy-in, and I think I'll jump maybe, Andy, into the mindset, and we talked earlier about the importance of why, right? And I think we need to recognize that that's often a barrier to innovation sometimes, but there are also lack of incentives, right? I mean, a lot of the way our system currently works is tremendously linked to performance and like financial performance. it's how salaries and bonuses work. Putting effort into, for example, understanding embedding ESG principles without understanding the why and the connection with business performance can be a challenge, right? So I think this lack of incentive is a barrier. And the good news is with some of the new ESG standards that have been released, for example, in Europe, or even with the ISSB, of which Canada is expected to be an adopter, we're tackling this. For example, in the case of climate, companies are now required to disclose executive compensation related to climate issues. So I think that's gonna actually, kind of like when your executive compensation is linked to that. And Paul, I'm here, in the Western system, right, of how things work. Unfortunately, that's the reality. Then people will put more effort into it because now they are required to show what they have done. And I think this will have a tremendous impact on addressing certain issues. We see similar trends around nature and biodiversity and disclosure around the impacts and dependencies of businesses on these biodiversity issues. And so I think this is kind of like a top-down approach, but it actually kind of a push factor which combined with some of the pull factors can actually advance the conversation. But more importantly, I think people need capacity building. And I think this is a reality. Like, you can be convinced you have the best intentions, but you don't know how to do it. And you need support. And I think we need to recognize that, particularly in the context of small business, this is maybe the major barrier. They really need capacity support. And I'm so glad with the ESG Center for Excellence being launched, and maybe Emma will talk more about that. But it requires not just government, but also many actors. And I would like to also say that we need to leverage expertise from universities to actually support that effort in capacity building. And that's what we're trying to do as well at University of Victoria in collaboration with communities and other partners. And of course, for the longer term, we're trying to also educate mindsets of new leaders, right, through our educational program and so on, so that actually it becomes something embedded in the way they do business. And so that's very important. But on government support, I think, again, earlier I mentioned the Singapore example. It's very interesting that they are actually offering grants, like, covering as high as 70% of funding required to embark in ESG reporting for the cost of, developing capacity in the space for SMEs, right? And so, like, we cannot just expect from small businesses who are trying to just go by to do it all on their own. They need financial support, they need, educational support, expertise. They need support from bigger companies in which they are, they are in their supply chain, and they're going to put pressure on them to deliver information and metrics because they are subjected to that. So they are also have the responsibility to support small business in becoming more active in the space. So I'll just wanted to highlight this is important, but this will also kind of combine with all the other reasons we mentioned.
Exactly. Yeah, no, thanks, Basma, because also what's coming to mind is, as you're describing that, is collectively we're trying to enrich the surface area of our business leaders to absorb new information, to evolve in the face and away from that sort of old school form of linear capitalism into something that is more enduring, which also means the business can endure and continue to make profit and continue to hire people locally, or keep the talent within BC such that we can nurture our communities. It goes so much further than ESG here, with those good roles, with good purpose that are making a difference, and then sharing that knowledge with others. We are building that capacity along with our partners in the universities and colleges, but also schools. But I think this is a great segue for Emma to tell everybody as snappily as we can what's happening with this ESG Center of Excellence, because with all of that in mind, we're really fortunate to have this resource well, now launched. So Emma, do you want to let everybody know what's going on there? Because this is particularly exciting.
Yes, yeah, we're very excited, and actually, we're lucky to have Basma as one of our advisors on. We have a 7-person advisory council that's made up of ESG experts that are BC based. So the ESG Center of Excellence was launched on February 8th. So actually, here we are, March 8th, 1 month in, So it was sort of, it's part of the Stronger BC economic plan and the larger plan. We're starting trying to stay focused because this is such a big area. But we, over the last year and a half, have been hearing from 400 plus different organizations within this space in BC, really trying to tease out what is needed, where are the gaps, because there's so much great work already happening at the, different academic institutions. We have awesome, consultants and experts in this space. And so figuring out what that need is, and it did come back to that sort of, especially at that SME space of that lack of time, lack of money to figure out the process. I think we've been hearing throughout this conference about like there's a lot of great work. Many of our businesses are already thinking in this way to an extent and like doing a lot of great things. I think we have a lot of advantages being in BC and using hydroelectricity, and are just generally the culture and labor standards that we do have. We're starting from a good place in this at looking globally. And so it's how do we help those businesses to like understand then how to communicate that and translate that into the data that might be needed when they're bidding on opportunities, when they're looking for financing, when they're telling their story to potential employees, and we look at future generations, the younger generations who are caring about this more. And so we have sort of 3 pillars, like capacity building being where we're focusing on right now, and then hoping to build up more business development, B2B, making connections between, different size businesses within BC as well as investors looking to BC. And then also kind of marketing BC as an ESG destination to kind of raise us all up to that awareness that, hey, come to BC because, we have XYZ. We're hoping to kind of be able to build that out so that businesses can kind of take some data and messaging that would be useful to them all as they try to market themselves. But on the capacity building side, we have a free one-on-one advisory service that any BC business can access. You'd go to our website, which is esgbc.ca. We have a free downloadable ESG 101 guide on our website. So anyone can access that to try to dip their toes into this space, start understanding what it means, what it might mean to them or not. And then you can contact us through the website and ask to check out our advisory services. So you would meet virtually one-on-one with an advisor, filling out in advance of that kind of assessment form of just, what sector, size of business, a little bit of like where you're at on your ESG journey. And then and our advisor will have that first sort of intro conversation, get to know you on, okay, well, where exactly are you at? And where do you want to go? Where are the pressures that you're facing? How do we prioritize your next steps and make the most use of your time? And if you are looking at putting money into this, and then we have kind of a huge resource directory that we're building and many partners that we're hoping to kind of build further in this space to be able to help kind of wayfind so that you can be like, for at the beginning, maybe it's taking a training course at one of our academic institutions. We have a couple of great kind of micro-credential opportunities. Maybe it's checking out resources from various available resources within BC and beyond. Maybe it's a funding program that we're help to kind of connect you in with. And then we also have in-house resources that we can walk you through. We have a materiality assessment primer that kind of gets back to that. How do you identify what those most important topics are to you? So our advisor will be able to walk through that resource with our clients. And then we also have a reporting playbook. So what does that look like when you actually get into reporting? What type of reporting makes sense for your business so it's not too onerous, so it's really hitting the mark for you and making the most use of your time? So we're hoping to really build this out. I'm sure it will be evolving as, as we're engaging with more and more businesses in this space. We're really kind of trying to be connected with industry associations, Chamber of Commerce, academic institutions. There's a new Center of Excellence for Indigenous or First Nations economic development. We're looking for lots of partnership opportunities for how do we add the most value in this space, and what else is needed. So yeah, excited to kind of have maybe some of you or businesses come try out the service and then kind of incorporate feedback as we go. So I'll stop there. I could just keep talking, but
yeah, I love your enthusiasm for this. This is such a core driver for what the organization will provide in support for the for those folks out there. And what comes to mind is I don't know if many of you know Elizabeth Sheehan, who was the founder of Climate Smart, but she had this great expression called nimblosity, which is sort of suggests a pace towards being able to change and continue to evolve. I just get this great sense that the ESG Center of Excellence has some nimblosity in its DNA, so that will serve SMEs nicely as they need to be more agile. And actually, I think, because I realize we're moving along at a feral clip, one quick question on supply chains, because I think many SMEs do support those of larger organizations, or in and of themselves have their own supply chains supporting them. And then we have one question from the attendees that I think would be a great one given the panelists. So let's just dive in on many SMEs serve those supply chains to larger entities. So what issues do the panelists feel that SMEs should consider as it relates to what's being described as ESG?
I think I'll just quickly say maybe just like thinking about what your vision is for your business, maybe over the next 5 years, where, you see yourself in terms of, are you wanting to say, get a product into a chain of retail stores? Are you, at some point envisioning that maybe your business would be purchased by a larger company, and then what would you need to be kind of positioning for, because you may not right now be needing to report to supply chain partners, but how do you make sure that you're prepared and you're kind of future proofed for your vision?
Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, I'll add that maybe, there are two aspects to this notion of value chain or supply chain. There's the commercial one, which Emma touched on, and particularly with these mandatory disclosures that I mentioned earlier, they both the European one and the international one require mention the supply chain, right? So basically companies need to disclose information on a whole range of issues throughout their supply chain, okay? Which means that they'll be collecting information through various tools from smaller companies. And, if you're not ready to provide that type of information, we go back to metrics here, then it's a problem, right? Because they may switch suppliers, right? And because they want to green their supply chain, or are concerned about certain practices in terms of business ethics or things like that. The other one that is important, and I'll touch on the question from one of the attendees here, is the financial value chain, right? So if you think about it, this is also impacting access to finance. And so when you think about the financial value chain, you start from, you have the large institutional investors, and typically, they're investing in larger companies or in smaller funds, right? So they're not necessarily investing directly into SMEs, but through the other intermediaries. And then we have a couple here with Heather's fund and also Paul, they seek investment from institutional investors. Many of them are signatories of PRI, or if it's a bank, they're signatories of responsible banking principles, and they want information around their loans and their equity investments from portfolio companies. And so there's a very serious ripple effect that is actually going through all sorts of intermediaries in the financial value chain that will touch, impact access to capital for smaller companies. And I think, of course, we're talking about ESG. There's also the impact side of it, which is more like focus on the intentionality around the business model and the product and services that are offering. We've seen a huge rise in impact investing, and even from individual investors to VC funds focused on impact, they are requiring information, and they're screening companies based on their contribution to sustainable development goals, but also ESG practices. So it's kind of like, too many things here going on, but definitely impacting SMEs, if not now, in the very near future. So you better be ready.
Thanks, Basma. And I think to lift from the question in the Q&A, perhaps Heather, jump in on this notion of, do the panelists see ESG impacting financing of SMEs? And what are they expecting? What else that we haven't covered today so far would the SME be expected to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think there's anything over and above necessarily what we've talked about today. I think it's, as impact investors, we're very cognizant that everyone's on a journey and you're at different places on your journey. So, Paul, you alluded to this, of meeting people where they're at. I think that we are not, I guess maybe one thing that we're not expecting is for you to have it all worked out. I think it's just, it's all about the intentionality. We want to walk on that journey with you. So, as long as you've got the intention and you can, as an investor, you can typically pick that up in the first 5 minutes of meeting someone if they really do have the intention of making an impact. And I know we're talking a lot about reducing impact today, which I was like kind of grappling with, because it's like, for us, we're trying to create impact as investors. So there's different ways you can look at impact, either you're additive or you're reducing it. But I think, yeah, maybe I'll flip it around and just say that the thing we don't expect is for you to have it all worked out, and that you just have the intention of working with an organization like us, or like Raven, or like the new ESG Center for Excellence, where you want to walk on that journey and get that support of people who have, because it is, I think, one thing to maybe note that we haven't said today out loud that is worth saying is, like, nobody has it figured out, and it's like continuously evolving. Like back, I was gonna say this actually, Basma, like I went to UVic and I was doing my BCom, but before that I was studying business ethics. And so I remember you when you were, a professor there, and back then impact investing was not a thing, and that's one reason why I went to business schools, because I was studying applied ethics and wanted to figure out how I could do something, like useful with it and give back. And I think that's one thing to note today, is like, nobody has it figured out, and we're all just like on this continuously evolving journey. It's just like an open kind of document that we're all figuring out together and trying to kind of get aligned on at the same time.
That's a great way for us to start moving towards closing up here, Heather, because I think for me, what's really lifting out of this conversation is, one, the notion that everybody is collaborating openly. And as we move towards reducing the impact of business, to be to be more precise there, as we move towards that, it's going to require all of us paddling together or weaving together, whichever expression we use, such that no one has to go on that journey alone. And with the ESG Center of Excellence providing support, when you've got capital partners who care deeply, like those that we have here on the panel, when you've got the teams like Basma's and others in the academic world who have research available, and also young talent emerging that understand this, that literacy, as we see in businesses, many are highly literate when it comes to their numbers. What we're asking and what is happening is an additional literacy is being required to be more responsible as a business for that business's durability, but also as it endures, to have less impact where we live and on those around us. So I'm particularly enriched today to hear from you all, and recording this to share with my daughters later, because to Paul's point earlier, those discussions just are the best. and what else can we pass on? So I'd like to thank everybody. We're running a tiny bit late, but I appreciate all of your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Andy, and thank you
Thanks.
to all our speakers for providing your time today. Thank you to Business Examiner for sponsoring this important conversation. And thank you to our presenting sponsor, RBC, our catalyst sponsor, Van City, for supporting Rising Economy 2024 in partnership with Pacific Am. We encourage you to head back to the Hoover platform to continue the conversation, where you can check out the event agenda and some upcoming sessions. Coming up next is Making Greater Victoria a World-Leading Blue Carbon Hub. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.